Well, good morning. Wednesday, the 16th of January, 2019. 4 minutes past 6 in the morning. We were 3 minutes late getting on this morning because, as usual, I pushed the wrong button. Once you push the wrong button with modern technology, you have to go back to the start, and it takes a couple of minutes to put everything in place. Hopefully we've got the right button now and that you can hear me. Although some of you would say, don't want to listen, let's put back the music. that introduction is called A Brightly Burning Fire, and I think that in many ways it has a somber tone about it, because this must be a somber day. The House of Commons, our Parliament, has got itself into a muck. It's the old adage, really, isn't it? If you actually allow everybody to have a say, you never come up with any satisfactory conclusion. And that's exactly what our Parliament has managed to do. There's 600 of them or so, highly paid, overpaid in my view, with lots of privileges, with more privileges and more effects than the Internal Revenue will... the Internal Revenue is the tax man, by the way, just in case I'm using an American term. The tax man will let us get away with is they get away with left, right and centre, and they all get together and they go mumble, mumble, mumble. And of course what's happened is that they have come up with the very worst possible solution for the EU Brexit. Doesn't matter whether you're a Remainer or you're a Leaver. That's not the issue. It's the way that our Parliament has handled it. I have a number of friends around the world who are in the diplomatic corps, and a couple of them have emailed me this morning and sort of said, oh, woe is me. And they're absolutely right. The rest of the world wonder what on earth is going on in Britain now. Well, who knows what's going on? Because I think that the electorate are completely bemused. And it doesn't matter which side you're on. In fact, Brexit has just become an emotional issue. The reality, of course, is something that is the real debate. I'm not going to get into that debate today, but it's not whether we should leave or whether we shouldn't. It's whether the system is workable. Can the system tolerate what politicians are playing at? Now, I'm not very happy with our own lot of politicians. And since the European Union, as a state, if you like, as a confederation, doesn't have any politicians. I mean, they sit in Parliament and waffle and without any real say. It's run by a small consortium of officials. They have certainly been stoking the fire this morning, and they're no better than our own set of politicians. I would offer the thesis that because being a political animal, in entering politics in a real way, has become a profession instead of a vocation, that this is why we're in this fix. And it's no more the fault of our own British politicians than it is of those in the European Union. And if I may say so, it's to some extent they're being assisted by what's happening in the United States and what's happening in Canada. But I would also suggest that it's their own damn silly fault. They have behaved in an abominable way for a number of years, and we, the electorate, have said enough. And you can speak to any politician, and they simply do not understand that. And the more senior the politician, the less they understand. They have come to the conclusion that really all they're doing is serving the interests of 600 people in Westminster. And the rest of the country of 55 or 60 million can go get stuffed. And as long as they take that attitude, I'm afraid we're in for a long, long haul of being a very unhappy people, very badly led people. There's a talk now of a second referendum. I think that would be disastrous. I will offer that opinion. A second referendum would be disastrous. But would a general election? I'm not so sure, because I would have thought the issue would have been do we stay in Europe or don't we? And that when a new parliament convened, it would have a mandate to do one thing or the other, and that would be it. That they should then follow that mandate, stay or leave. That is the best way, rather than go back to a second referendum, which I think, and a lot of other people think, is a dangerous move for democracy. All right, and we've said that bit, so what we should do is play that little music, I think, and I'm going to hear this as, let's see, what's it called, the coming storm. Let's see what the coming storm has to offer. Oh, coming storm is quite an abrupt ending. It caught me a little bit off guard there because I was busy looking to see what else we might play later on out of so-called playlist. But anyway, that's the coming storm, and the coming storm we most certainly have. So apparently the first people to rush down to Westminster to talk to cabinet ministers, in fact confront them, were the top business people. Whom I sometimes think just as every bit out of touch with the common man as our politicians. Oh yes, they understand the market. They understand what we'll buy and what we won't buy. They understand how much we'll pay and what we won't pay. They understand how to target audiences, as they call them, sections of the community. But do they really understand what makes us tick? I'm beginning to think not. But anyway, it was a bunch of business people who were first out of the traps and down to Westminster to talk to cabinet ministers. And as they pointed out, and very right, is the present situation gives absolutely no continuity. Nobody knows what's going to happen. So why should they invest money? After all, investment is very key to any development, but investors expect a return on their money. That's their commodity. We may not like it particularly, but that's their commodity. They play with cash, and they expect a return for investing their cash or lending their money, and it's a fair do. So they are saying, hey, listen, there are all sorts of projects which now can't go ahead, won't go ahead. They'll be stalled for a while until you lot can make up your mind what it is that you want. Because one observer has rightly pointed out, is the House of Commons has now pointed out what it doesn't want, but it doesn't apparently have any key idea whatsoever about what it does want. They're just as divided about things as they ever were. So we're left in a right old muddle. Now, some people will say, oh, Keith, don't be so silly. This is heading towards us staying in the EU. Well, if that's the case, so be it. But, what a way to do it. Hardly democratic. And, one of the things that I found very interesting, we always point to democracy coming out of Athens, Athenian democracy, where, in fact, the citizens would meet. Not slaves or aliens, by the way. Anybody who's not an Athenian citizen didn't get a vote. It was only citizens' votes. and I believe also, I'm terribly sorry, but no women either. So it was quite a small number, but they used to meet on a plain outside the city and say, let's put this to a vote. And democracy got them into such a muck after 2 or 3 decades of trying it, that they actually reverted to a different form of government. And democracy didn't work. And I begin to think that perhaps we're in the same situation as democracy isn't working. Churchill said, it's far from perfect, but it's the best that we've got. But I wonder whether it is. I don't know. I don't have any suggestions as to what we might put in its place. But then again, good suggestions come out of good debate. And I wonder whether we should have a debate about whether democracy is worth keeping. Could we? We have a constitutional monarchy. Could we revert to having a monarch who has a much greater say in affairs than they do at the moment? I don't know. I have no idea. But if we had such a debate, I hope that it would be debated in a cool and calm way, because the Brexit debate has been so emotional. Friendships have broken up. Families have parted company. People aren't speaking to one another who've known one another for years and years and years, all because of Brexit. In other words, a very emotional issue. But perhaps we've got to take a cool, calm, calculated look at where we are generally, because it's my view that the real problem is with the system in the EU, not the EU itself. It's not the idea of being part of a much bigger organization so that other things can be achieved. It's the way that it's done. It's the way that it's constituted. And I keep using the quote from Mikhail Gorbachev, who I may say has huge standing with people in the main. Very few people say, oh, he's a Russian. No, he was a very brave Russian, and he led Russia into a much more modern system than they ever had under the old Soviet Union. A very brave man, but also a thinking man and a very intelligent man. And Mikhail Gorbachev said words to this effect: one of the great mysteries of his political life is the rate at which European politicians are rushing towards recreating the old Soviet Union. And I think he has a point. I think that the fact that there's been a rebellion has to do with the fact that we do not like the dictatorial system that has been set up for us. It's not like that in other countries. Federations in the United States, they're having a wee bit of a problem. Canada, they're having a wee bit of a problem. Australia, they're having a wee bit of a problem, but they're having a wee bit of a problem, not a huge problem such as us. But their federations are based on loose power in the center, and a great deal of power devolved to the various constituent parts. So, for instance, California would have a say on its own education system. It has its say on its own transport system. It has its say on its own development of the economy system. And the things that it doesn't have a say on is the currency, although once in a while there have been states that have attempted to break away from that. The currency and dealings with foreign powers. And after that, the states, generally speaking, in the United States and the provinces in Canada, I know less about Australia, but I believe that it's the same with the various states in Australia, have enormous powers to get on with the day-to-day living and to do what they want within bounds. There are some legal things. It's important to have a national police force. It's important to have a Supreme Court. But these are things which they do little to affect the day-to-day living of the individual citizen. It's their right to elect an assembly, a state parliament, if you like, a state senate, to look after their local affairs. We haven't done that. What we've done is we've continually taken power and thrust it towards Brussels and said, get on with it. And one of the big debates is Brussels going to let us do this, and is Brussels going to let us do that? Well, that state of affairs isn't going to last for very long. So a lot of rethinking needs to be done. All right. Well done, Keith. I think I got a few blood-boiling points going around the country at the moment, because more and more people are beginning to tune into us in the morning. And I haven't said, you see, we're a bit raw. This is Rouser Radio, which comes out of Lewis. Now, Lewis has a wonderful, wonderful reputation of being the place where rebellion starts. It's, first of all, there was the Battle of Lewis in 1264. Where Simon de Montfort chose to attack the king, and the Battle of Lewis created the first parliament, or a parliament as we know it today, and perhaps thankfully not, but the first parliament that we had in in England anyway. And this was well after Magna Carta, which King John signed. This was some 50 years or so after Magna Carta. Magna Carta didn't work, even though it was full of promise. But the Battle of Lewis stirred up something called a mise, or a mise, M-I-S-E, anyway, which was an agreement between the king and the barons that they would have much more say in the governance of the country. So we started off in 1264, but then we had Tom Paine in the late 1600s and early 1700s, who raced off to the United States with his rights of man. Now, he was a real rebel and managed to induce the American Revolution. And also he helped Robespierre with the French Revolution. So Lewis has a real record of kicking against the establishment. In fact, we took the side of Cromwell in the English Civil War. So that's why rebellious thoughts come out of here. And I do, you do have to forgive me, because I'm following on in the tradition. Lewis in East Sussex is a rebellious town. And so forgive me if I'm reflecting the way that we've been for so many years. Anyway, I'm rabbiting on. Let's just play a little more music, because it gives me a chance to take a breath. And it also gives me a chance to give you a rest, so you can go and sip your coffee and say, what an idiot you're listening to this morning. But I don't mind you saying that, because that's the way the debate should start. So let's see if we can perhaps play a little music, and this is called Half Day. tough day. It is. Oh, it's going to be a full day today. I would imagine that there's lots for the entire country to talk about with the defeat last night. Everybody keeps on talking about a historic defeat. So what difference does it make? A defeat is a defeat, whether it's historic or not. And I think that the crushing defeat, yes, it was a crushing defeat, if you use those terms, for Theresa May, is going to be probably reversed today. She'll get a vote of confidence. I doubt that Jeremy Corbyn's no confidence vote or non-confidence vote is going to pass. Mind you, we're full of surprises, so let's keep an eye on that, because, as I understand it, he could then be asked to try and form a government. We don't have to necessarily go back to the polls. There's another reason, perhaps, for reforming the system. And the Queen could ask him to try and form a government if he can. Then, if he can't, then we go back to voting, to an election. But anyway, it's a mess, and we'll have to see how it plays out, to see how it's going to be sorted out. And I hope that since we came up with the worst possible solution to the Brexit issue, that we don't come up with the worst possible solution of governance of this country, which affects us all on a day-to-day basis. So we live in strange times. But I started to say, and you can probably tell that this is stream of consciousness broadcasting, because there is no script. I just talk the way that I see things and that my mind tells me to follow. So sometimes there are non sequiturs. Sometimes I seem to be wandering, but by the same token, it's the rattle, if you like, of a simple man. I see myself as being fairly simple in my approach to what's happening in the world and what's happening in the United Kingdom and what's happening locally. And really, this radio station is to try and keep an eye on what's happening locally. But we can't get away without what's happened last night. It's going to affect us all. So, although we're featuring events and affairs and so on as they affect us in Lewis and the south coast of southeast England, East Sussex, from the little town of Battle through to the little town of Lewis and all the little towns on the way, and then up to Gatwick on the west side and up to Tunbridge Wells on the east side, which accounts for a few million people, I may say, but none in communities of much more than 100,000. So it's an interesting area. But that's where we normally are trying to broadcast to. But the wonderful thing about the World Wide Web is that it is worldwide. And already this morning I've had a couple of responses from overseas. And we welcome the thoughts of people from overseas about what's going on, because sometimes that's where sensible suggestions and good suggestions come from. We haven't actually got to the point where we can take chat on this program. It'd probably be a week or two yet, but we are then going to actually turn it into a phone-in program, if you like, with music, and so that we can get a few views, and those of you who can turn over first thing in the morning can pop in and have your say. Those of you who are overseas, some of whom haven't yet gone to bed, you could you'll be able to have your say, and why not? Because that's what conversation, sensible conversation, calm conversation. Oh, come on, Keith, are you ever calm? No. Is so important. But yes, the Rattle of a Simple Man was a play in the 1960s about a young northern chap who is what we might call a mama's boy and never does anything terribly daring, but he comes down to London to see the cup final, and the football cup final at Wembley. And he goes out with the lads afterwards into London, and he meets a lady who is selling her favours but she turns out to be rather a nice lady. Diane Salento, as I recall, was a very attractive film star in her day. And he eventually gets caught up with her and pulls himself away, and then decides that this is the lady for him, and he goes back and he bursts through the door to say, "I'm back." He says, "I forgot me rattle," because in those days, football fans carried what was known as a rattle. It was a wooden contraption which you swung around in the air and you went brr, 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 brr. I don't know that they use rattles anymore. Perhaps they've been banned from football. I have no idea, along with everything else. But anyway, it was called the rattle of a simple man, and I'm a simple man, and that's the way I see things, in a simple way. And sometimes I'm challenged on that. But, I sometimes also think I listen to people who want to discuss things in the complicated way, and that, in fact, they've actually created the complexities themselves and then enjoy trying to puzzle them out. The average man, you can sit down over a pint and you can have a chat. Yes, he may have a simple view of things, but that's life. And that's what we expect our politicians to do, is to lead us and to guide us. And we're not getting much of that at the moment. So, why not join me in Rattle of a Simple Man? Let's rattle long enough and hard enough so that the rattle echoes not only throughout Westminster, but throughout the EU as well. In my view, they are as culpable of the present situation, which affects us, and to hell with them as politicians. They are as culpable as our own lot. I would say clear out all their houses. If not, what I think is we will create a gap into which all sorts of evil people might march. It's happened in history before. It could happen again. Okay, that's me for the morning. Toodle-bip.